Nikita Khrushchev. For a fateful decade, the world knew him well, in many places and in many moods. The chubby little communist whose power and glory now are gone. 1917, Russia is in revolt and a new nation is born, conceived in chaos and baptized in blood. Nikolai Lenin, architect of the Bolshevik Revolution, becomes master of the Soviet masses, imposing a new harsh tyranny on an old ravaged land. 1924, Lenin is dead and an era is ended. Now it is Joseph Stalin, ruthless, despotic, who dictates and commands. And making his first appearance among the communist elite, Nikita Khrushchev, a miner's son, self-educated, shrewd, ambitious. As the years go by, Comrade Khrushchev moves up. He sits beside Stalin and becomes a member of the party's inner circle, a trusted lieutenant, a dedicated communist. Dies. The world watches, waits, and wonders. Who will succeed Stalin? Who will win out in the struggle for power? The job of premier goes to Nikolai Bulganin, while the office of party secretary is taken over by Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev. Together, B and K, as they are called, go traveling, carrying their gospel of communism to countries behind and then beyond the Iron Curtain. In Peking, standing side by side, Comrades Khrushchev and Mao Zedong pledge before the world friendship, peace, and mutual cooperation. Next, a vilification of their fallen idol, and Nikita Khrushchev, his accuser, becomes the true successor to Stalin. 3 years later, the Russian leader and Vice President Nixon engage in an impromptu television debate at Moscow. The Soviet premier taunts the vice president by saying Russia will pass the United States for 1966 and wave to her going by. If you wish, he says, we can stop and say, please follow. Khrushchev will pay dearly for failing to fulfill his boast. In 1960, and to be seen by millions of Americans. His travels take him to an Iowa farm where he inspects modern methods of raising corn and livestock. Soviet and American pigs can coexist, says Khrushchev. Why can't we? And at Aspen Lodge, final talks between the Soviet premier and President Eisenhower give promise of a new era, a new spirit in Russian-American relations. The year General Assembly.
Им не потому, что они черные, поэтому лучше белых, нет, а потому, что они сколько веков.
Why then this jerk, this stooge of American imperialism here, who's speaking before you, he is touching upon questions which are obviously not procedural ones, and the president, who is sympathizing with these colonialists and colonial domination, obviously is not stopping him. Is that justice? Mr. President, we live on earth not by the grace of God and not by your grace, sir, but the force and the strength of our great Soviet people and by the strength of all peoples who fight for their independence.
Russia and Nikita Khrushchev are in orbit in these, their golden days of glory. The Soviet Union has taken the lead in the exploration of space. Vienna in 1961, the old Russian leader and the young American President John Fitzgerald Kennedy meet for the first and only time, face to face. 16 months later, with the discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba, their two countries will stand eyeball to eyeball as the world trembles on the brink of nuclear war. Nikita Khrushchev will blink first, telling his people that for the sake of peace, Russia will withdraw her missiles from Cuba. World peace, uneasy as it may be, is preserved. In Peking, militant Mao Zedong has only scorn for Khrushchev and his actions. Peaceful coexistence, says Mao, is a betrayal of the basic Marxist-Lenin doctrine of violent world revolution. The conflict between the two giants of the communist world grows sharper as Red China speaks less and less as a satellite and more as an equal. (1963), Russia takes still another significant step along the road. Nikita Khrushchev challenges Secretary of State Rusk to an informal game of badminton. Soviet-American relations have never seemed better, and Comrade Khrushchev's position of power has never seemed more secure. On April 17, 1964, on his 70th birthday, the Soviet premier is decorated and honored. Your remarkable deeds have won you the love of all Soviet people, he is told. For Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev, this is the last hurrah. Five months and 28 days later, Khrushchev is out, and his successor as Communist Party Secretary, Leonid Brezhnev, is denouncing the deposed leader as a harebrained schemer, immature, a braggart. The shake-up in the Kremlin is completed. Such are the ways and workings of communism. Such are the uncertainties and uneasiness that await all who would rule in Russia today.
And Communist Party Secretary. Nikolai Lenin is the architect of the October 1917 uprising that shakes the world when Leonid Brezhnev is only 10 years old. Lenin and his followers are in the minority, but they are dedicated and determined. And their counter-revolution topples the regime that has ruled since Tsar Nicholas II was driven from the throne in March. Lenin's immediate concern is the continuing civil war and the threat of armed intervention by foreign nations. By 1920, the fighting is ended. Now the Soviet leader can concentrate on strengthening his power and laying the groundwork for history's first communist state. January 1924, Nikolai Lenin is dead. An era is ended. A ruthless political commissar calling himself Stalin, the Russian word for steel, holds the country's most powerful post, General Secretary of the Communist Party. He systematically purges potential challengers for power, and in 1929, Joseph Stalin is Russia's undisputed dictator. In the mid-1930s, public trials are used in another purge of political dissidents and Red Army officers. 35,000 military leaders are convicted. Russia's aid, and President Franklin Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Premier Joseph Stalin formed the Big Three of World War II. When victory is won, allies become adversaries. Soviet troops occupy Eastern Europe. An Iron Curtain descends across the continent. Puppet regimes are set up in Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Yugoslavia. By 1950, the Soviet Empire stretches farther than it ever did under the Tsar. After almost 30 years of unparalleled power, Joseph Stalin dies at 74 on March 5th, 1953. The next, Khrushchev becomes the first Russian head of state to visit America. The animated Soviet leader is a man of changing faces and contrasting moods as he pursues his self-proclaimed policy of peaceful coexistence between the free and communist worlds. 1961, a year of achievement for Soviet scientists in the race for space. Yuri Gagarin has become the first human to orbit the Earth, and crowds in Moscow's Red Square salute the 27-year-old cosmonaut. The historic flight is a propaganda victory for the Soviet Union, and Gagarin is caught up in a Russian bear hug by Soviet Defense Minister Malinovsky. Later, the cosmonaut is decorated by Leonid Brezhnev, an up-and-coming member of the Politburo. In 1962, Khrushchev suffers an embarrassing diplomatic defeat. Another setback is Mao Zedong's feud with Moscow over theories and tactics of world communism. The final break comes when Mao denounces the 1963 nuclear test ban treaty. Now, following in the footsteps of Stalin and Khrushchev, the new party secretary sets out to strengthen his power in the Politburo that rules the Soviet Union. Traveling to Hungary, he meets with János Kadar, premier of the Soviet satellite. In this and other countries under Soviet influence, Leonid Brezhnev seeks to end what he calls the international disorder created by Khrushchev and to restore. Brezhnev represents a new generation of Soviet leadership, for as a child he played no part in the Bolshevik Revolution. In 1967, on the 50th anniversary of the revolution, many of the Bolshevik promises remain unfulfilled. With twice as much land and a greater population, the Soviet economy produces less than half as much as the United States. But militarily, Russia's active duty manpower is greater. In addition to superiority in manpower and conventional weapons, the Soviet Union's arsenal of ballistic missiles is believed to equal the U.S. stockpile of strategic atomic weapons. The Golden Jubilee includes special ceremonies honoring Nikolai Lenin. Although he ruled for less than 7 years, Lenin, the Russian people are told, is more alive than the living. Leonid Brezhnev unveils a statue of the man who is virtually deified by more than 1 billion people around the world. And yet the Soviet Union in 1967 is more like the regimented society created by Stalin than the communist state left by Lenin. Whatever the legacy, Russia is remarkably changed on its 50th birthday. At a special assembly of Communist Party members in the Kremlin, delegates hear first from Nikolai Podgorny, who holds the largely ceremonial post of president. Next, the dignitaries listen to Party Secretary Brezhnev elaborate on a new concept of communism called the Brezhnev Doctrine. Satellite nations may enjoy qualified sovereignty, he says, but the Soviet Union retains the right to invade any country that threatens to change its political structure or desert the satellite camp. There can be only one brand of communism, and it must conform to the Moscow line. Communists say goodbye and go their separate ways. In bitter frustration, others curse at armored troop carriers in symbolic gestures of defiance. While there is no large-scale resistance against the invaders, through a series of agreements on trade, space exploration, and limiting strategic arms. Despite the emphasis on détente, Leonid Brezhnev reaffirms his belief in the inevitable triumph of international communism. But he also realizes American capital can help to modernize Soviet industry and improve Russian living standards. Moscow, May Day, 1977. For Nikolai Podgorny, it left his last May Day as president of the Soviet Union. Leonid Brezhnev is set to complete the consolidation of power that began with the ouster of Nikita Khrushchev in 1964. Podgorny is relieved of his office, and Brezhnev becomes the first man to serve as president and Communist Party secretary. Years have passed since the 1917 revolution. Communist leadership has been handed down and passed on, Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, until alone and apparently unchallenged at the top stands Leonid.
It is a custom for war veterans to visit schools and give talks to students about what it was like fighting and living during the Second World War. This happens especially on May 9th, our victory day against Nazi Germany.
О войне можно рассказать очень много, товарищи. Вы уже знаете, вы читаете книги и все, но основные эпизоды, которые случились со мной, я вам все-таки расскажу. А Северном Донце, что я могу сказать? Эта речка Северный Донец, вы знаете, что форсировать ее очень трудно. Она находится, понимаете, пехота на той стороне.
Usually, on May 9th, Moscovites go to Red Square to pay tribute to Lenin, the father of our nation, by passing in silence in front of his grave. We also have a custom of going to cemeteries on that day to honor more than 20 million people we lost during that war. There was practically no family that was not touched by that war. I myself lost 2 brothers, but I do not go to a cemetery on that day because one of my brothers was buried in Germany, and we have never found out what happened to my second brother. On May 9th, many people in Moscow also place flowers on the tomb of the unknown soldier. Because of all the hardships during and after the war, both my wife and I feel grateful for what we have today. Our sons have different lives, different needs.
За 3 место награждается сборная команда Общинские республики. В ее составе мастер спорта Маргарита Сухаревича, Даугава, Латвийская ССР. За 1 место награждается сборная команда Общинские республики. В ее составе мастер спорта международного класса Лариса Попова, Общество Молдова, Молдавский.
Children are
The Red Leader enters Shanghai, capital of nationalist China. The bamboo curtain drops around 1/4 of the world's population. Fighting ends, peace comes. On October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong proclaims the birth of the people of Peking. Our country will never again be an insulted nation, says Mao. We have stood up. Chiang Kai-shek flees to the island of Formosa, signs a mutual defense treaty with the United States, and vows one day to return and liberate the mainland. In June 1950, North Korea, Communist China's neighbor, invades South Korea. The Soviet to the north, Chinese troops are cheered and hailed as they prepare to withdraw to their homeland. Mao claims a momentous victory for the People's Republic and dismisses the United States as a paper tiger. Inside the People's Republic, unification is complete. Mao Zedong and his trusted Chief of Staff, Zhou Enlai, have made Communist China an emerging superpower by brutal force and rigid discipline. President Nixon and Chairman Mao acknowledge basic differences between their countries, but at the same time agree to work toward normalization of relations and ways of preventing international war. 850 million people in Communist China, troubled days and fateful decisions lie ahead. Continued